precisely what happened to previous civilizations. They tended to put their houses on the most fertile land because they didn't want to have to walk far from their houses to where they actually farmed, and that's where the houses built up, and that's where the cities built up. The difficulty is that if you pave over all this land, and that land, I got it from a government report, that land represents 3 times the area we have in grapes and 3 times the area we have in kiwi fruit. Now, the reality is that the grapes and the kiwi fruit are actually earning us an income as an economy, as a country, as New Zealand Limited trading with the outside world. Just covering that land with houses doesn't earn us an income, and it diminishes the amount of income we can earn potentially. So it's not necessarily a good thing, but the main reason I gave that statistic is just to show that we're not actually better or different from anywhere else in the world. We just happen to be a younger country and one with a relatively large area and a relatively small population. But give us time.
Yeah, which also makes us relatively complacent about a lot of these issues, doesn't it? Because in fact, if you're living in New Zealand, it's pretty hard to see evidence of some of the things you talk about.
Absolutely.
Enough evidence to go home and think, right, I'm going to do something about this.
New Zealand was rated the #1 country in terms of the Environmental Performance Index, which is the replacement report for the sustainability report. We have the least damaged environment in the world, and that might just save us as long as we change what we do. Now, the mania for building more and more suburbs is all predicated on the assumption that people are going to be able to drive to work in their cars at a rate of 1 person in the driver's seat and nobody in the passenger seat, and that will go on forever.
Pause there for a moment. I don't know whether you saw it last week. You just reminded me. I don't know whether you saw it on television last week. It got quite a lot of coverage. But they're planning in Christchurch a whole new city called Pegasus. And they unveiled the plans for it last week. And it's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary thing. This biggest model ever made and all the rest. And the Prime Minister launched it. And the houses are grand, and there's a man-made lake, and there's a big shopping centre in the middle, and there's a big mall and big school and all the rest of it. But it's precisely what you're talking about, isn't it? It's kind of, 25 k's out of Christchurch.
Well, I have to apologise, Linda. I'm so allergic to ads that I don't actually watch television at all.
And you're not even part of the 31, those 31 old fogies that wrote the letter.
No,
but this is the kind of thing, this is a developer's idea for what New Zealanders would like. This is your sort of perfect, ideal, almost resort town on the fringes of an already existing city.
You just have to try to imagine whether it would be viable for Pegasus City to continue if you can't drive everywhere. That is the problem. What I would like New Zealand to do would be to actually have some sort of an inquiry into what we would do if the oil actually runs out, so we can't actually buy oil at any price, and also what we could do if the oil just becomes very expensive. Now, in either case, I think the viability of suburbs far distant from markets, and it's just not on. I think that the mania for building grand suburbs, the mania for building ever-increasing size of roads through towns like Auckland and Wellington, it just cannot go on forever, because oil is either in depletion or it's going to be in depletion very, very soon. And I'm sorry, I'd love it to be otherwise.
So this whole row over Transit New Zealand, that we saw a lot in the last couple of weeks, Transit New Zealand having to put back some of its major roading developments simply because it doesn't have the money, and the government saying, no, we'll bring the money forward, and everyone, Business New Zealand and all the others saying, if we don't have these roads, it'll be a disaster. You're saying...
It's all completely missing the point. Absolutely. There seems to be a complete collective blindness to the fact that oil is not an eternal thing like sunshine. Oil is actually a one-off bonanza that we've been enjoying for the last 100 years, and when it's gone for absolutely forever. And if people imagine, for example, that we could grow biodiesel or bioethanol, I'm afraid that they're living in a fantasy world. Professor Jeffrey Dukes actually calculated that we burn every year the planetary equivalent of 400 years' worth of plant growth. So the thought that we could somehow convert a little bit of arable land into rapeseed and into sugarcane is just a complete fantasy. It would take us 400 years to grow enough biodiesel and bioethanol to cope with 1 year of consumption the way we are at the moment.
But isn't it also fantasy to think that New Zealand, that New Zealand could come up with some kind of policy? I mean, if we went with your idea and we had an inquiry about what would we do if the oil ran out or the oil was much reduced, we can't solve those problems alone, can we? Because as you said earlier, we now live in a global community. Doesn't there need to be a global solution? And aren't the chances of finding any global solution absolutely zero?
I mean, if we could manage fusion reactions using hydrogen to make helium, that is accompanied by an absolutely gigantic release of energy. Now, if that was possible to do, then we might say that part of our energy troubles are over. And I say only part because, in fact, New Zealand's energy consumption, only about 25% of it is actually in the form of electricity, and about 63% of it is in the form of transport oil. So even if we were somehow able to magic up an enormous production of electricity, it wouldn't necessarily solve all of our energy problems overnight. A scenario that I'm trying to envisage is, could we convert enough arable land into the production of biodiesel and also divert the products of the meat industry to make biodiesel so that at least we could keep the tractors going so that we could grow food for ourselves? And then the next step would be to decide what else could we do. Could we move it around the country in trains? Could we even build ships and have some sort of a trade with trading partners overseas using biodiesel to fuel the ships? But what worries me is that we may not actually be able to do that, in which case we're going to be reduced to a very, so the world is going to get very big again. It's no longer going to be a global village with possibly the exception of global communications. And, you know, I'm despairing, actually, Linda. Now, I think the reason I feel that I've got something to say about this is precisely because I'm not a political person. I've never been a member of any political party. And I'm also not a paid-up member of Greenpeace or any of those sorts of organizations. But I am an educated person. I get my information not from the sort of 5-minute snippets on the television and the nonsense snippets you get on commercial radio. I actually get my information from national radio and from scientific publications. And I'm just trying to warn my friends and the people in my country that we are in desperate times, and I think we need to start moving at wartime speed, trying to gear up to save ourselves.
I appreciate you coming on the program. It's fascinating stuff. I'd like to talk to you again. It's been very nice having you on the program. Peter Lloyd, he's a senior anaesthetist at Hawke's Bay Hospital, which just goes to show how interesting those anaesthetists could be if only you were awake when you dealt with them. Let us know what you thought about all of that. 9 at radio, nz.co.nz. And watch out for him because he gave a public lecture in the Bay last week and he's had a number of invitations already to repeat it, and I suspect he might get more still.